Thank you, Joseph. Merci beaucoup. So our next presenter, it's Christel Protiere. Christel Protiere is a French social science researcher, economist, and psychologist. She works in Marseille, in the south of France, in the INSERM research unit system. She has first worked in the development of patients' empowerment in the field of oncology, and her research aims to take into account citizens' point of view in the public decisions. Since the last decade, she is involved in the HIV field, in particular regarding ethical issues associated with HIV cure-related clinical trials, questions raised by PrEP use, and chemsex practices. Thank you, Christel, and welcome.
Just try, okay. Thank you. So I'm very glad to share the results of this study, and I can't have asked for a better introduction to this study with all the presentation just before. So, okay. Just to introduce what we are considering as chemsex in this study. All the things were said just before, but just to say that I think we have to consider chemsex in a specific environment. That is to say something which is contemporary of the new synthetic products, the apps, the dating applications, and a society marked by a culture of performance and consumerism, and with the introduction of PrEP. And as already said, it's most often approached through the prism of risks and forgetting the pleasure dimension, and with the idea of an inevitable trajectory, which is the honeymoon and then the evil. So we were very interested of what are the different ways of relating to chemsex, that is to say the perceptions and the experience with the practice of chemsex. So for this, we surveyed a population of men who have sex with men engaged in chemsex at the time of the survey. And we conduct face-to-face interview to control for the diversification of the sample, in particular regarding the fact of being a slammer, HIV serostatus, and the geographical area, rural or urban. And then with a web-based approach to reach the under-surveyed people, because in the studies, often we have nearly the same kind of population, and with some people who were over-interviewed. So we use a specific methodology, which is the Q methodology, and it's a mixed method, and I just introduce it to you to give you some keys to understand how are constructed the results. So when do you use Q methodology is when you want to explore complex subjective structures like viewpoints, preferences, or representations, and to obtain a multidimensional picture of the subject at stake. And we have seen just before that there is a lot of dimensions that were involved in chemsex, and so what we are interested in here is the interrelation between all of these dimensions. And how we can manage this, you ask two people to rank a set of statements about the subject at stake on the grid. You have just on the slide. And just to put the statements on this grid, this forces to articulate each the dimension together. And the statements were obtained, perhaps it's just after that, yes. So the Q methodology, we use 3 steps. The first one is an exploratory qualitative step, and we have already seen a lot of verbatim, so it's exactly what we obtained during the qualitative step. And from this verbatim, for all the corpus, we selected more than 5,000, no, 100 statements, and we reduced this statement to 37 statements, and all the people have to rank them on the grid. So after that, to analyze the results, so first we used factorial analysis. So the factorial analysis is just a way to combine in one group all the rank that were similar. So that is to reconstruct a group of respondents who have nearly the same way to rank all the statements on the grid. And this allows us to obtain a shared viewpoint. And so we are having a look to the consensual statements, that is to say the statements that were ranked exactly at the same place by all the respondents. And after that, we are looking to the statements placed at the extreme and the associated comments, that is to say, when you have finished the exercise, we ask you why you are ranking the statements that were at the extreme on the right and on the left. So just some characteristics of the respondents. So we obtained a p-set, that is to say the sample, of 126 persons. They were between 21 and 70 years old, with a median age of 44. So the big point, the big bullet, is just to point out the characteristics we want to be diverse, that is to say geographical diversity. And we have 37% of HIV positive person, 24% who have experiences HVC, 35% were slammers, and they were nearly engaged in chemsex since 6 months to 24 years at the time of the survey, of the study, with a median duration of 3 years. Just this little graph gives you the, oh, sorry, it's not translated. So there is a little quarter of the sample who practice chemsex sometimes during the year, and a big quarter, it's nearly once a month, and after that there is more than there is 37% who practice often during the month, and 14% who practice often during the week or each weekend. So just to give you an overview of the drug used, it was an open question, so it's interesting to see that alcohol, for example, is considered as a drug for the chemsexers because it's an open question, and that there is 85% of the sample who consider themselves as being polyusers. And if we constructed the variable by ourselves, that is to say without alcohol, poppers, Viagra, and cannabis, we obtained that 61% of the sample is polyusers, drug users. So, I will not give you all the detail of the results, but just the final one. So there is 5 main relationships to chemsex that emerge after the analysis, from the most positive viewpoints to the most negative viewpoints. Something which is very important to say is that these viewpoints correspond to the viewpoint at the time of the survey. Of course, it could evolve during time. And there is 2 consensual statements, that is to say all the respondents agreed on these points. The first is that considering oneself as a drug user is a necessary prerequisite for thinking about own consumption, and then to change it if you want. And the second one is that they all agree that there is a possibility of harm reduction during chemsex sessions. So this is a good information. So here are the five main relationships we obtain, and we just labeled them. So the most positive one is from compensating to accepting one's sexuality. The second one is the pleasure-seeking manager, or the hedonist manager. After that, we have an intermediate viewpoint, which is quite paradoxal, which is between addiction and management. And the two last ones were very, very negative, which is from curiosity to the destruction of the sexuality, and from the hope of compensation to disillusion. So, as I said before, we asked to comment the reason why you put some of the statements at the extreme, and with the analysis and with the help of this verbatim, we constructed some narratives, just illustrative narrative of the five main viewpoints, five main relationships to chemsex. So for the first one is from compensating to accepting one's sexuality, that is to say the fulfillment. So we can resume it like that. Before practicing chemsex, my sex life wasn't totally fulfilling, and I had experienced moments in life that weakened me. The chems allowed me to access tenderness and sexual practices that I was not comfortable with before. For me, not having a sex life without drugs isn't really a problem. This practice gives me the possibility to belong to a community, and I rely on discussion groups to regulate my use. In the end, it's a plus in my life. The second one, it's my sexual journey that led me to practice chemsex. I didn't use drugs before. My primary motivation is to spice up my sexual relationships, and it is important for me that this practice remains occasional, so as to not lose control, to make sure to continue to have sex without taking drugs, and that drugs use takes place exclusively in a sexual context. To avoid risks, it's preferable not to learn to inject yourself and to practice with a narrow circle of acquaintances. So this is a regulation that can be questioned, of course. So the third one, the paradoxal one, can be illustrated like that. Before practicing chemsex, I had encountered problems with desire and erections. Chemsex, which is an accepted practice for me, based on the search for new sensations and the rush effects, can help with meeting partners and having sex. I always use drugs recreationally, and it's essential for me to know the good risk reduction practices and to share them. By the way, it's after warning that I learned how to manage my use, for example, by taking breaks without any practice. So the last I was hearing about chemsex that made me want to try. Thanks to the drugs and the rush effect, I was able to allow myself harder practices, to surpass myself, and to access sex without foreplay. However, the other side of the coin is there. It's a practice that leaves its marks, that tends to dehumanize relationships, that has heavy negative consequences on my sexuality, and that has led me to doubt my feelings and my reaction. And the last one, it's the idleness, the solitude of pre-existing weakness that leads to chemsex. If at the beginning you can see an improvement, it ends up having adverse effects on your quality of life, health, or social life. There is a process of self-destruction in this practice, and the limits always end up being exceeded. Chemsex was meant to address problems. It ends up adding new ones. So just to finish before discussion, something which is really interesting also is just to look at each of the viewpoints, the relationship to chemsex, and the percentage of declared difficulties. And as you can see, the most positive, so the respondents who belong to the first relationship, are the ones who declared a lot of difficulties, nearly as the one just in the middle, and the most negative relationships. And by the way, the pleasure-seeking manager and the from curiosity to the destruction of sexuality just declared less difficulties than the other ones. So just to end it, I can propose a key message, which is to consider the heterogeneity of relationship to chemsex. And perhaps when we are learning for some people, when the discourse is too positive, perhaps too positive is not so positive than that. And there is a proposal that is to use the 5 narrative as a support for discussion during chemsex interviews, and in particular for health providers that were not familiar with chemsex, that can help to talk about the possible risks and to tailored solution of harm reduction for each chemsexer. And that can help also for identifying the evolution of the way to relate to chemsex over time. And also as a scale in surveys or for the questionnaire. And of course there is a need, which is national or more, but at least national, longitudinal survey, because we really need to explore the trajectories and the experience during time, and as said already. And also to identify the factor associated with the shift to one relationship to chemsex to another. So just thank you for your attention. And thank you for all the respondents for their availability, their trust, and their authenticity during all the study. Thank you.
I literally missed your last sentence. The shift, identifying associated to a shift from one relationship to. Do you want to say more what you're thinking about that? I mean, because I think that's a very interesting point.
Well, I really think that all the study we have made for the moment are transversal. So it's exactly the same for the qualitative survey we heard just before, that what is important is really the factor that can help us to avoid the direction to the negative relationship to chemsex. And for example, I think to the second one with the harm reduction, which is not to learn to inject, for example. I think when I made the focus group, just before this second step, it was generally people who were at the beginning of their practice. And yes, thank you for your question, because I forgot something which is really important. We have a large sample in this study, because for the Q methodology we can have only 30%. It's okay to make this analysis, but we wanted to make some analysis in the subpopulations, between the slammers, only to the slammers, the HIV positive, because we generally have a focus on HIV negative people because of PrEP, but for HIV positive people. I'm not sure that their HIV physicians really ask them and some new question regarding their consumption or their sexual practice. And also according to the way you live, urban or rural area, just to see if there is differences in terms of the relationship to chemsex. And at the end, we can see that these 5 relationships to chemsex are representative of all the population and the subpopulation. Okay. You're welcome. Any other question? Oh, I can do it. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So thank you very much. We are almost at the end of the day, and Ben and I want to discuss about. Sorry. Can you hear me better now? Yeah, it's better. Sorry. The idea now is to raise some point of discussion, some challenges, some perspective for research intervention in the future, and also to discuss how do you feel after this day, Ben?
Well, I'm well aware that I'm with a group of researchers at various stages of their careers, and I was dreading coming. I've been in situations with some researchers where the language was so confusing that I didn't realize they were criticizing me, you know. And David Stewart and I have gotten criticized a lot. So I was a little bit nervous, but I had an incredible relationship with Iris and with Jorge, and that felt great. And we did some really interesting sort of, is it okay to say harm, you know, or what happens if people, you know, insist on not saying harm. You know, I've been in situations where people absolutely refuse to talk about harm, you know, and then they make fun of people doing chemsex. So anyway, it was great to be in the presence of researchers. I have nothing but compliments for the whole process and what's going on here. It's really exciting. It really made me think about pleasure and what's in it for us as people who I would assume are at least activists in some ways. You know, you may see yourself as a researcher, but you're choosing difficult terrain that's where people's lives are at stake. And so I felt this was a really good example of what it's like to have pleasure for us. There happens to be somebody here who sort of just came in because he has had chemsex experience, and what his experience today has been just how exciting it is to be around us. You know, to be around people who really care and people who really focus. I felt like the use, I'm looking at Yannick because I felt like Yannick's dialogue specifically around listening to what people are saying and creating an environment where people actually can say what they want to say. It reminds me of like, use your words, you know, and I think it's absolutely responsible and necessary for us to use our words, to have our role, and to be clear about what we're doing and being engaged. You know, I don't think we're not talking about them. We're talking about us. And I think that chemsex is only one example of what I see is a period of deep social loneliness and confusion that's been going on since neoliberalism in the 80s. I think that the one concern I have, I think, is there's a way of being too close to chemsex or too far away from chemsex that I think it's really important, because chemsex is just 1 inch away, 1 meter away from incredibly high use of alcohol and other drugs in a marginalized community, LGBT people. But it's also, what's our marginalization and what do we understand as marginalization? Absolutely, marginalization does not mean the same for everybody. I'm not saying that I'm a black sex worker, trans person, blah, 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 blah. But it's been essential for me to recognize that I'm here because of my marginalization and because I really need to be here. And I think it's really important for people to really look at intersectionality, to really look at, I mean, intersectionality isn't a new horoscope. It's not a new way of sort of saying I'm this, this, and this. It's that all of our lives are connected and that we all share these problems. That's my initial thoughts. And I do want to say that I think some of you are self-limiting when you're talking about chemsex as being just for men. I think that it's really helpful to start using language around trans people specifically. Mm-hmm. When we did our sort of, we have a piece on our website that is an agreed piece from about 90 people that contributed, and we always included trans people in the discussion and felt it was very essential. And it was absolutely essential when we really came down to understanding that we were talking about gay hookup culture, and have trans people really identify that, you know, that we were talking about a new form of gay hookup culture, and that the trans people who were working with us were really able to identify with that. And so it's using the terms trans and non-binary, and, you know, really asking people, and it may take forever, but I think if you say it's not them, then they're definitely not going to be engaged. And, you know, I think the most recent work we've been doing was research about women and amphetamine use, and it was prompted by women talking with me about it, specifically knowing that it wasn't chemsex, but that it is a new form of sex. It's a new form of sexualized substance use that is in the same issues of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. So it's not chemsex, but it's deeply marginalized and deeply problematic. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Ben. I'm very impressed about all this presentation during the day, and I have taken some notes during the day, and I think we have some issues, some challenges for the future in terms of research and intervention also. And one of these things, I think, is the definition of the chemsex. You have been talking about it, and also Yannick and some of you. We have a lot of definition of chemsex in the literature, and there is not especially a consensual definition of that, and this more common use chemsex definition is more cisgender men, and I'm happy you say that it's very important to include also trans and non-binary people in the definition of chemsex, because if we don't not include those people on the definition, we cannot do intervention with them. So it's very important to think about the definition of chemsex and the population, and also the substance that can be used in the chemsex scene, on the sexualized substance use scene. Another thing, I think it's also a challenge for the future, is the importance of, you also raised this point, Ben, is the importance of to have a space to talk about good things and bad things about chemsex. We don't. It's important to don't censure ourselves about when we talk about chemsex. We can talk about pleasure, but also resilience, Science community. Okay. Technically aujourd'hui, the technical aujourd'hui today was not very good, so it's another challenge maybe for the next chemsex symposium. Have a better technical support, but it's not your fault, guys. So you I think it's UQAM stuff. Thank you. And other things, I think you share a lot kind of intervention, and as Vincent said in the morning, I think it's very important to share our expertise, our experience, and maybe chemsex forum is just a good place to share their experience. So I invite people who are not already in the chemsex forum to go, and you can find a lot of information, and we can share those all very amazing intervention and initiative that has been showed this morning. Another thing I think it's an issue for the future is the financial support of the all services and intervention, and I think somebody I think during the morning I think it was Rusty who talked about prevalence and the importance of for some institutions to have information about prevalence of chemsex before funding chemsex initiatives. So I think we need to go further this injunction of having numbers for chemsex so, and I think you share today a good initiative, and I think it's important that this initiative to be known, and I think it could ensure more financial support. Yes, I think I have another notes in my computer, but I think for the most, Ben, you have summarized very well also that I have observed today. So I don't know if you have a final remark or questions about the day.
I would like to add one more comment, and that was I felt like the discussion about the assessments and Christel's work at the end, the whole idea of trying to really define people's varied experiences and to elicit information from people. I thought the assessments discussions were really good and helpful. I think I'm envisioning people talking more about social determinants of health, more about neurodiversity, more about early childhood events, adverse childhood events. I think it's going to be a really helpful contribution from chemsex for people to really help people understand how the difference in marginalization, Christel, I think that's part of what you're talking about. And I noticed last night when I was reading it, I went, wow, the complainers were, they were throughout for different reasons, which I thought was phenomenally interesting. So, thank you.
So maybe before we let you go, I want to thank Ben, because Ben has been very generous with us. He has been involved in the organization. We have some exchange by email, by Zoom. So thank you very much, Ben, for your support. It was very precious for us. Thank you. And thank you to... thank you. So thank you also to all of you for your participation. I'm very happy for this first symposium. Somebody told me, it would maybe a good idea to do this symposium each year. So I don't know, maybe it's not a promise, but stay in touch. So for those who are attending the AIDS conference, so have a good conference. Maybe we can see each other there. And yeah.